7 medieval vegetables that were banned, and why big agriculture doesn't want you to know. The Forgotten Harvest. Imagine walking through a medieval English market in the year 1320. There are no glossy plastic-wrapped carrots. No identical, machine-perfect cabbages stacked in pyramids. No uniform supermarket potatoes shipped from hundreds of miles away. Instead, you'd find strange, knobbly roots, bitter leaves, purple-streaked stems. Vegetables that look almost wild, because they were. Some of them were later restricted. Some were discouraged. Others quietly vanished. Not always because they were dangerous, but because they were inconvenient, uncontrollable, or simply unprofitable. Today, only fragments remain. Let's uncover 7 medieval vegetables that were effectively banned, suppressed, or pushed aside, and explore why modern industrial farming might prefer they stay forgotten. 1. Skirret, the Tudor sweet root. Long before the potato dominated British soil, skirret was prized. This sweet, carrot-like root was cultivated widely across medieval England. Monks grew it in monastery gardens. Nobles served it at feasts. It had a natural sweetness, almost like parsnip mixed with honey. So what happened? Skirret is delicate. It doesn't store well for long periods. It doesn't grow into uniform shapes. It doesn't travel well in bulk. When the potato became widespread after being introduced from South America in the 16th century, skirret began to disappear. By the time of the agricultural revolution, it was effectively obsolete. It wasn't officially banned, but it was quietly replaced. Industrial farming prefers crops that grow consistently, store for months, survive transportation, yield high volume per acre. Skirret did none of those efficiently. Today, you'll struggle to find it outside heritage seed collections. 2. Good King Henry, the peasant spinach. Before spinach became commonplace, villagers relied on a leafy green called Good King Henry. It grew freely. It required little maintenance. It self-seeded generously. It was known as poor man's asparagus because its young shoots could be cooked like asparagus, and its leaves were used like spinach. However, Good King Henry grows unpredictably. It spreads widely. It doesn't fit into neat rows. By the 18th and 19th centuries, formal farming systems preferred controllable crops. Spinach, which grows faster and yields more uniformly, replaced it. The old plant became labeled a weed. Once something is called a weed, it becomes expendable. And so Good King Henry faded into obscurity. 3. Sea kale, Britain's coastal treasure. Sea kale was once harvested along British coastlines and even cultivated inland in the 18th century. Victorian gardeners forced it under pots to produce tender white shoots, much like rhubarb. It had a mild, cabbage-like flavor and was considered a delicacy. But sea kale grows slowly. It demands patience. It isn't suited to mass mechanized harvesting. As global trade expanded and faster-growing brassicas dominated, sea kale fell out of favor. Today, it's protected in parts of the UK. Wild harvesting is restricted. A vegetable once common became rare, not because it was unsafe, but because it didn't suit modern efficiency models. 4. Alexanders, the Black Death herb. Alexanders arrived in Britain with the Romans and remained common through medieval times. Its stems were blanched and eaten. Its seeds were used as spice. Its leaves added flavor to stews. After the Black Death in the 14th century, food habits shifted. Stronger-tasting herbs gained superstition. Some plants became associated with illness or poverty. Gradually, celery replaced Alexanders. Celery grows larger, cleaner, and more uniform. It responds well to cultivation techniques. Alexanders returned to the wild. Now often dismissed as a roadside weed, it quietly survives in hedgerows, largely ignored by supermarkets. 5. Rampion, the bellflower root. If you've heard of rampion, it might be from the fairy tale of Rapunzel. In the original story, Rapunzel's mother craved rampion from a witch's garden. That vegetable was real. Rampion root was eaten across medieval Europe. It tasted similar to radish or turnip and could be eaten raw. But rampion roots are slender and delicate. They are labor-intensive to harvest. They don't produce high yields per square meter. When industrial agriculture expanded, crops were selected for scale. Ramping could not compete. Today, it's almost entirely absent from mainstream agriculture. 6. Fat hen. The unwanted superfood fat hen, also known as lamb's quarters, was once a valued leafy green. Archaeological evidence shows it was eaten in prehistoric Britain and continued into medieval times. It grows almost anywhere. It's resilient. It's nutrient-dense. But it grows where it wants, not where it's told. Modern farming classifies it as a weed because it competes with cereal crops. Ironically, it's more nutritious than many supermarket greens. Instead of being cultivated, it is sprayed, removed, and eradicated. It's crime? Growing too well without corporate seeds. 7. Scorzonera. The black salsify scorzonera was known in late medieval Europe as a medicinal root, believed to protect against poisons. It has a dark exterior and pale flesh. The flavor is subtle and slightly nutty. But scorzonera stains hands when harvested. It looks unattractive when unwashed. It grows slowly. In a world where appearance drives sales, odd-looking vegetables struggle. Carrots are bright and cheerful. Parsnips are recognizable. Potatoes are dependable. Scorzonera is unfamiliar. And unfamiliar vegetables rarely survive in modern supermarkets. Were they truly banned? Let's be clear. Most of these vegetables were not outlawed by decree. They were economically sidelined. Industrial agriculture developed around uniformity, shelf life, transport, resilience, high yield, predictable growth cycles, visual appeal. Crops that didn't meet those standards were gradually excluded. Over time, seed diversity narrowed. Supermarkets stocked fewer varieties. Farmers specialized. And consumers forgot alternatives ever existed. The bigger picture, monoculture and control. In medieval England, diversity was survival. If one crop failed, another might thrive. Today, vast acres are dedicated to a single crop variety. This system increases efficiency but reduces biodiversity. Heritage vegetables challenge that model. They self-seed, adapt locally, resist some pests, naturally, don't always require patented seeds. From a purely commercial perspective, they are harder to standardize. And in large-scale agriculture, control equals profit. Why interest is returning across the UK, heritage gardeners and small-scale growers are reviving forgotten crops. Farmers' markets now occasionally feature sea kale, skirret, heritage parsnips, unusual root varieties. There's growing awareness that biodiversity strengthens food security. Climate change also changes the equation. Crops once dismissed as inefficient may prove resilient in changing conditions. The question is no longer whether they fit supermarket shelves. It's whether we can afford to lose genetic diversity altogether. The truth behind the ban narrative: the word banned makes for a dramatic headline. The reality is quieter, but no less significant. These vegetables weren't outlawed by kings or parliament. They were filtered out by economics. Replaced by crops better suited to global trade, mechanization, mass storage, consumer expectations. Over centuries, convenience reshaped our diet. What disappeared wasn't always dangerous. It was simply different. Could they return? Yes, but likely not through industrial supply chains. Their future lies with allotment growers, heritage seed networks, organic farms, local markets, biodiversity initiatives. The medieval table was far more varied than many imagine. Perhaps the real question isn't why they vanished. It's why we stopped asking where our food comes from. 7 Medieval vegetables that were banned. Part 2: Seeds of control, seeds of resistance. In medieval England, food was local. It wasn't branded. It wasn't trademarked. It wasn't owned. Villagers saved their own seeds. Families passed down planting knowledge. Monasteries experimented with unusual varieties. Crops evolved slowly, adapting to local soil and weather. Food was decentralized. That changed. The agricultural revolution, when farming became industry between the 17th and 19th centuries, Britain experienced dramatic agricultural transformation. Enclosures removed common land. Smallholders lost access to shared growing space. Large estates consolidated control. Efficiency became the priority. New tools, new breeding techniques, and improved drainage boosted yields. But diversity declined. Farmers were encouraged to grow crops that stored well, crops that transported easily, crops that produced uniform results. Strange, temperamental, slow-growing vegetables no longer made economic sense. They weren't illegal. They were impractical. And impractical crops don't survive in profit-driven systems. The role of standardization supermarkets, which arrived much later, accelerated the narrowing of choice. Uniform carrots sell better than twisted ones. Identical cabbages stack neatly. Straight parsnips look appealing under bright lights. Medieval vegetables rarely meet those aesthetic standards. Take skirret. Each root twists and branches unpredictably. Harvesting it requires patience. Cleaning it takes time. In industrial farming, time is cost. When scale dominates agriculture, anything inefficient is sidelined. That's how diversity quietly disappears. From food to weed, a powerful label. One of the most effective ways to eliminate a plant is to reclassify it. Fat hen, once eaten widely, is now categorized as a weed in cereal farming. Good King Henry? A weed. Alexander's? A roadside nuisance. When something is labeled a weed, it is no longer protected. It is sprayed, plowed under, or removed. Language matters. Once a vegetable becomes a weed, it loses its cultural legitimacy. And very few consumers question what was lost. The economics of seeds. In medieval times, seeds were saved year after year. Modern agriculture changed that model. Hybrid seeds dominate large-scale farming because they produce reliable, high-yield crops. However, their seeds often cannot be replanted with consistent results. This means farmers must purchase new seeds regularly. Heritage vegetables, by contrast, are often open-pollinated. They reproduce naturally. They can be saved and shared. From a corporate standpoint, open-pollinated crops offer less long-term revenue. This doesn't mean there's a secret conspiracy. But it does mean economic incentives favor certain systems over others. And systems shape food availability. Climate resilience. What medieval growers understood: medieval farmers didn't have fertilizers, pesticides, or advanced irrigation systems. They relied on diversity. If frost destroyed one crop, another might survive. If soil quality declined, hardy plants could still grow. Today, monoculture dominates, large fields planted with a single crop variety. Monoculture increases vulnerability to disease, pests, extreme weather, soil depletion. Ironically, some of the vegetables abandoned centuries ago are naturally resilient. Sea kale thrives in poor soil. Fat hen tolerates drought. Skirret copes with cooler climates. In a changing climate, resilience may matter more than appearance. The psychology of familiarity. Another reason medieval vegetables vanished is simple: habit. Consumers buy what they recognize. Ask most shoppers to choose between a bright orange carrot, a dark, soil-streaked scorzonera root. The carrot wins every time. Marketing influences perception. Carrots are promoted in children's books, advertisements, and recipes. They symbolize health. Scorzonera? It remains obscure. When something lacks cultural presence, it struggles commercially. Over time, the unfamiliar becomes invisible. The allotment revival across the UK, allotment culture, has quietly revived interest in forgotten crops. Gardeners experiment with heritage varieties. Seed swap events celebrate biodiversity. Local food movements challenge supermarket dominance. These growers are not driven by scale. They are driven by flavor, history, and sustainability. Many report that heritage vegetables taste richer, adapt better to local soil, require fewer chemical inputs. Small-scale agriculture offers flexibility that industrial systems cannot. Perhaps the future of these vegetables lies not in massive supply chains, but in community gardens. Were any truly banned? Historically, food bans did occur, usually during famine or crisis, but most medieval vegetables were not prohibited by law. Instead, they were displaced by global trade, replaced by high-yield alternatives rebranded as inferior or old-fashioned, forgotten through generational shifts. Banned in this context means economically excluded. An economic exclusion can be just as final. The hidden cost of simplification: modern supermarkets may offer thousands of products. But in terms of raw vegetable varieties, choice is narrower than ever. Most carrots come from a small number of cultivars. Most potatoes belong to limited commercial strains. Genetic diversity has declined dramatically over the past century. This matters because biodiversity is insurance. Without it, disease outbreaks can devastate entire food systems. History shows us that dependence on a narrow crop base carries risk. Medieval diets were not glamorous, but they were diverse. Rediscovering the forgotten seven interest in heritage vegetables is growing among sustainable farming advocates, chefs seeking unique flavors, environmental scientists, home gardeners. Restaurants occasionally feature sea kale with butter sauce, skirret puree, rampion in seasonal salads. What was once peasant food is becoming culinary curiosity. Food trends often move in cycles. Perhaps we are witnessing the beginning of a return. A question for the modern table: when you walk through a supermarket aisle, consider this: how many vegetables available today would a medieval farmer recognize? Some, certainly. But many older varieties have vanished. Not because they were toxic. Not because they were illegal. But because they didn't align with efficiency, aesthetics, and profit margins. The medieval harvest was messy, irregular, and diverse. Modern agriculture is streamlined, controlled, and standardized. Both systems feed people. But only one preserves wide biodiversity. Final reflection: the story of these seven medieval vegetables isn't about hidden secrets buried in archives. It's about gradual change. It's about how economics shapes ecology. It's about how convenience shapes culture. And perhaps most importantly, it's about remembering that the food we see isn't the only food that exists. Some vegetables weren't banned by decree. They were edited out of history by efficiency. And somewhere in an allotment garden, in a hedgerow, or in a heritage seed bank, they are still growing.